it's kind of interesting. So you're going to need a little bit of cinnamon, ground cinnamon. You're going to need some sugar. You're going to need a lime wedge, obviously, for margaritas. You're going to need some tequila, some apple cider, a little bit of triple sec, and definitely some lime juice. So you may have some of these things in your house. You may have some of these ingredients from like a previous episode, but here goes. So the first thing you want to do is you want to not salt rim the glass, but you want to cinnamon sugar rim the glass. Ooh, man, that sounds good. So you take the cinnamon and the sugar, put it in like a little bit of a pile, take the lime wedge, rub it around the top part of the glass, and then bam, put that into the cinnamon sugar. Okay. From there, you want to get roughly about maybe I want to say maybe 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces of tequila. Then you want to get maybe 6 to 8 ounces of apple cider. You want to get probably 1/2 ounce of triple sec, the orange liqueur, or some of that Grand Marnier you still have laying around, and just a splash of the lime juice. Okay. So you want to stir together, all of the ingredients in a shaker with a little bit of ice. All right, a little bit of ice, and then you want to pour it out. And then what you want to do is cut an apple slice and drop it into it, and then put the lime wedge on the edge of it in case you want to give it a little bit of sweet and sour contrast. Oh man, it sounds good, doesn't it? Admit you want to make this drink. I know you're listening right now, and you're like, man, I'm gonna go try this apple cider margarita like right now. This is a slick variation off the regular margarita, which, if true to form, is definitely the kind of slow sipping cocktail that you can enjoy while you watch a movie like this, and it will sneak up on you just like The Invitation will. According to the definition of existentialism, existence is always particular and individual. My existence, your existence, his existence, her existence. And the primary problem with existence is the investigation of the meaning of being. That's right. I went there with you on this one. You're thinking to yourself, what the hell does this have to do with a married couple going off trying to get help at a retreat, somewhere? Well, when you start getting into who we are and why we're here and the decisions and choices that we make and the freedom of those decisions, you start getting into discussions of existentialism. And that's, interestingly enough, that's kind of like where this movie kind of goes at certain points. Mark Duplass plays Ethan. And if you don't know who Mark Duplass is, he was in Zero Dark 30. He's also been very prominent on the Mindy Project. He's been in Goliath, and he's also been on The Morning Show. He also played in an interesting movie called Creep. I have not seen it, but I've heard it's like one of those kind of underground hits. I'm going to look into possibly reviewing Creep down the road. So, look for that one. Elizabeth Moss is a little bit more prominent. She has been in Picket Fences. She was in Escape to Witch Mountain. She was also in Girl Interrupted, The West Wing. She was Zoe Bartlett on, she's Peggy Olson on Mad Men. She's been in The Handmaid's Tale. And right now, you probably recognize her. She's more recently been in The Invisible Man, that weird, freaky movie about that guy that disappears and then just stalks her. So she's a good actress. So watching these two go, I can't say mano y mano. I guess is it mano y womano or what? I don't want to make it like a man. Anyway, watching these two match wits against each other in this movie, I thought was really, really cool. It's kind of like, intellectual sparring or like boxing, with emotions involved. So I enjoyed this one. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. The character arcs, funny as it were, I don't think either one of these characters really go through much of a change. I mean, there's a little bit of change from the beginning towards the end, but to me, I think, Ethan and Sophie are selfish for different reasons. And that is revealed as you watch the movie. They come to the retreat with the hopes of changing or bringing about some changes in their marriage. But it's almost as if the harder that they tried, the more they didn't really change by the time the movie came to its closing. I mean, there were moments where they wanted to please one another, but I can't quite tell if that was motivated from a sense of a true desire to change. Both of them played their characters remarkably well, and their problems as a married couple just seem to be all too real. I think everybody who's been involved with somebody for a long period of time has gone through some of those rough patches. But it's interesting. I'll say this. I do think that Ethan's character kind of changed towards the end. And you could argue that Sophie's changed went from a positive more towards a negative, because it seemed as though initially she was a very kind of giving person, but then towards the end she became kind of selfish. And initially in the beginning, I guess you could say Ethan was selfish, but then towards the end he decided to become a little bit more of a big giving. But that's, as I always like to say, that's subject for interpretation. The dialogue of this movie, I thought the married couple conversations really, when it comes to being married, you really don't have time for subtext. Okay, you say what you mean what you say. I don't think anybody who's in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, married, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is that you're involved in, I think no one wants to be tooling around with hidden messages. Say what you mean what you say. But I thought that the way that these lines were delivered was very, very special. And you can follow along with the conversations. And as you do so, it really kind of gives you a window into their mindset. But also, as important when you watch this movie, it's not even so much the dialogue that you have to pay attention to, but it's the idiosyncrasies and the nonverbal movements and the connections that these characters kind of display. There's certain things that they do that kind of reveal who they are and what they're thinking. So I think it's not so much of a verbal dialogue in this one as it is a non-verbal dialogue. Now, the conflicts that are inside this story, oh man, Ethan versus himself and Sophie versus himself. I think these characters were definitely battling one another as they are unsure about their marriage due to some events that happened and just overall general malaise. I mean, I thought Ethan was battling himself. I think Ethan was battling himself as he was trying to become a more engaging and interesting husband. I mean, you see that in the very beginning of the movie when he sits down with the counselor, who happens to be Ted Danson, by the way. I think Sophie was battling herself because I think it's perceived that she's a little bit of an uptight nag of a wife. Let me take that back. I won't say she's a nag of a wife. That's kind of mean. I will say that there's something that led Ethan to do some things in his past. And it's kind of weird, but when you see, I'll say she seems a little bit of uptight. I'll leave it at that. So so the big question is that when you were dealing with these kind of conflicts, how do you overcome yourself? Like, how do you resolve a conflict within yourself or within your own character? I mean, this is when you start getting into the whole existentialistic aspect of things. I mean, if you were to change who you are in order to be somebody else, then you really wouldn't be you. Now, would you? There's also the conflict of potentially human versus the kind of supernatural. There's something going on at this resort that I'm not even going to try to explain. Even after watching it several times, I still haven't quite figured it out. I've read articles online on the internet, and it's still kind of confounding, but I guess you just kind of have to let that go to what they call creative interpretation or suspending your disbelief. The plot type, symbolically, I guess you could consider Ted Danson to be kind of like a fairy or like a genie or something like that, who is granting this couple a wish. The only problem is that, like with anything in life, if you have this wish, what would you do with it? And if you got exactly what you wanted, would you really, really want it? And if you actually got it, would it make you happy? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird. So it's an interesting kind of plot type for this one, but I guess it's one that you have to kind of, as you watch the film, you'll come up with your own ideas as to what exactly is happening here. Thematically, it's all about existentialism. It's all about the importance of the individual, and you're highlighting Ethan and Sophie, not just as a couple, but as individuals. Who are they? What brought them together? What was that spark that's holding them together? There's the importance of choice. As the film progresses, these individuals make choices that affect the outcome of the movie. But there's also choices that they have made in their past that has brought them to this point where they are now at this retreat, where they now have to make more choices that ultimately determine the outcome of the film. The meaning and the absurdity of it all. I mean, it's actually the premise of the film itself. I mean, when you watch it and you try to figure things out, initially you're going to be, okay, now this just doesn't make any kind of sense. Like, this is just absurd. But the more the absurdity plays itself out in front of you, the more you begin to understand exactly what is happening. Authenticity. Man, who is authentic, and what exactly does it mean to be authentic? And what about the importance of interpersonal relationships when it comes to existentialism? You know, to me, the personal relationships of authentic people and the choices that they make truly do shape their individualism. So this is all about who we are and where we are and what we are all about and how we relate to one another. And more importantly, through those relationships with each other, are we really happy? Yeah, I just said a lot right there. I'm kind of like, even I don't want to say I'm confusing myself, but man, there's a lot happening here. Perfect structure of the film. In the first act, you know, the hook is watching them try to fix the marriage. In the second act, things get really complicated at the resort. Midway through, Sophie and Ethan must kind of confront one another and trying to figure out what is it that they're going to do. And then in the third act, they leave the retreat with potential hopes of having a new life. So, that's the film in a nutshell. Now, this movie was directed by Charlie McDowell, and he is known for, having credits on The Discovery and Silicon Valley. He's also done a couple episodes of Dear White People. So he's been around, but he's relatively a young director. To me, the setup of the retreat, one of the key things that he did as a director, the setup is fantastic. It's beautifully done. It's a sunshiny place, and it kind of really gives you the sense that nothing can go wrong. Like when you look at this resort in the movie, you're thinking like, man, how could they mess this up? There's nothing but hope here, right? It can't go wrong. Images of the countryside and the mountainside give this surreal sense that this place is going to be an oasis of change that will help their failing marriage. I thought the outfits that were picked out for these individuals were strategically chosen for purposes of plot development. And you'll see how that plays as the movie plays itself out, which again was also really, really cool. And the performances of Duplass and Moss are absolutely great. I mean, they really mirrored each other in a way that is tough for most actors to do, especially when you see how the story plays itself out. Now, what worked, I thought, was as the story unfolds, realizing what is happening and how it creates this satisfying storytell. I mean, when you're watching it and you begin to really understand what's being shown to you, you're like, wow, that's a real cool way to understand how couples interact with one another and what they expect from one another. What felt short or what I didn't think really worked, I would have liked to have seen some more of the dysfunction in their relationship. I mean, the movie's only like an hour and 30 minutes long. I think you could have tacked on like an additional 15 that really would have shown some of the dysfunction and how damaged they were and how this retreat was hopefully going to be a last resort for them. Now, as far as the rating of it, it is rated R because there's not any nudity in there, but there is a love scene and the language can be a little bit spicy at times. And when it comes to my Aristotle index about the likely impossibility, man, normally when there are this many numerous impossibilities, it makes for a bad movie, but they're so convincingly done, it makes the movie really, really cool. So you completely suspend your disbelief while you're sitting back and enjoying this one. IMDb gave it a really high 7.1. I mean, that is some rare air for IMDb. Rotten Tomatoes gave it an 82. I thought this would be higher. The audience score gave it only a 76. And I can understand that. I think to me, the reason why the audience score wasn't that high is because that some people just probably didn't believe this movie made any sense, or they probably thought it was silly, or honestly, I can see how a movie like this could cause a strain on some relationships. Okay. As far as the cinema and cocktails rating, as I like to go, man, solid 4.5. I mean, you could even push it to 4.5. I thought the movie was perfectly done. I didn't see anything that was wrong with it. This movie really goes nowhere without the performances of Moss and Duplass. I really don't know if there's anybody else who could have played those particular roles. I mean, they gave great performances right down to the idiosyncrasies and the subtle reactions and the eye movements and the little tics that each person had. The story is strong, but once you kind of get